The Four Noble Truths is probably one of the most famous of all the Buddhist teachings. And in fact, it goes right back to his first discourse, so far as tradition is concerned, anyway. So what are they? Well, first of all, you've got the truth of suffering, or let's say unsatisfactoriness, to use perhaps a better term. Secondly, you've got the cause of suffering. Thirdly, you have the cessation of suffering, the bringing to an end of suffering. And fourthly, you've got the path leading to the cessation of suffering. In other words, the whole of the spiritual path. So I'm going to try and say a little bit about each of those. So first of all, we've got unsatisfactoriness, or dukkha. Well, the technical term is dukkha, which it can mean suffering, it can mean pain, it can mean unsatisfactoriness. But let's take it as pain. Let's take it as suffering. We all experience suffering in life, whether we like it or not. We can't escape from that. So Buddhism is not saying that the whole of life is suffering. It's just simply pointing out the fact that in life there is suffering. You can't avoid it. That suffering may be physical, or it may be emotional, it may be mental. It may manifest in a whole range of different ways, but you can't avoid it. Life is fundamentally painful. Despite the fact that very often we may feel very, very, very happy, we don't undergo a great deal of suffering, but sooner or later suffering will affect us. When you grow old, you see this more and more. Recently, I was diagnosed with cancer, which is a very, very painful thing to undergo. It's a very painful thing to sort of contemplate. I've been healthy all my life up until that point, but suddenly I had a cancer, and I had to be treated with chemotherapy, radiotherapy, very, very painful. And that was a wake-up call for me. Until I was 67, I'd never had a serious health issue in my life, but suddenly it became part of my life. Disease became part of my life, and I had to face up to the deeper facts of life through that. Cancer can kill me. So it wasn't just a question of suffering, it raised right before me, if you like, the fact that one day I was going to die, and perhaps even quite soon. I didn't know. 3 years later, I'm still alive, but I'm only in remission. My cancer can recur at any point. So these things happen. People get sick. They get killed in a war, maybe, or on the streets. Many people are killed in road traffic accidents. So it's a fact of life. We may be very lucky and escape these things, but sooner or later they catch up with us. So life contains suffering. Even the happiest life contains some element of suffering. So then we have to ask ourselves, well, what's the cause of that suffering? And according to the Buddha, ultimately the cause is craving. Craving for existence, craving for sensuous experience, craving for positive, pleasurable experiences, let's say. And this is partly because of the unsatisfactory nature of our lives. We find ourselves often, we're distracted, we want something which will alleviate perhaps our sense of unsatisfactoriness, our underlying sense of dissatisfaction with life. And so we turn to all sorts of things. It could be food, it could be a holiday, it could be, you can imagine. You just think of what are the things that you turn to when you get bored. That will give you some clue. So the cause of the fundamental cause of all our suffering is craving, according to the Buddha. It's a craving to escape unpleasant experience and a craving to have as much positive pleasurable experience as we possibly can. Then thirdly, we have the truth of cessation, the end of suffering. So this is really quite wonderful, the fact that Buddhism teaches the end of suffering. It teaches that suffering, life is suffering, but you can go beyond that. You don't have to be stuck with it. And the whole of the Buddhist path is concerned with this, going beyond suffering. The cessation of suffering is equivalent to enlightenment. So this is quite wonderful, the fact that Buddhism teaches this. So the Four Noble Truths is not a pessimistic teaching at all. It's a very positive teaching. It points out that there is a higher goal. There's a higher sort of state of consciousness that we can rise to, a transcendent state of consciousness that we can rise to. But that's not going to happen automatically. It happens if we make an effort to move towards that higher state of consciousness. which is why we need a path. So the Buddha again taught the way to enlightenment. He taught the way beyond not just suffering, but the way beyond craving, the way beyond hatred. And so all Buddhist teachings ultimately point in this same direction. And there are many, many different teachings in Buddhist tradition. But the one which is normally associated with the path to the cessation of suffering is the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path. It's a more lengthy exposition of the path than the Threefold Way, for example. But it's a complete teaching. Everything that you need to do in order to gain enlightenment is contained within those 8 stages of the Eightfold Path. So Buddhism addresses the issue of human change, changing for the better, in a variety of different ways. We may have a different approach according to our temperament and so forth, but what we have to do is to learn to change, learn to overcome fundamentally what drives us. And ultimately, according to Buddhist analysis, we're driven by greed, hatred and delusion. At least in our world, at our worst, that's what drives us. Of course, again, we're not always in the grip of greed, hatred and delusion. People can behave very, very kindly, compassionately, even wisely. But nonetheless, underlying the condition for the human condition, according to Buddhism, are these 3 negative emotions, which we need to transform. Mustn't deny them. We have to acknowledge that they're there and work with them. And we can work with them. We can transform them ultimately to wisdom, even the wisdom of enlightenment.